now. It's like, okay, obvious. Like, I would rather have gained all of the weight and felt healthy and not felt out of control and not had this emotional burden. Like, give me all the weight. I'd rather have that. At the time, there was no trust in that. There was so much fear. I wasn't ready to do that.
Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here to help you end 24/7 food thoughts, binge eating, and actually enjoy life with food. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only, not to be substituted for medical or personalized advice. Check the link in the description for my recovery resources, and let's get straight to the episode. In this episode, I'm here to introduce binge eating coach Krista. But enough about me trying to do some introductions. How about you tell us a bit more about you, Krista?
Yeah, hi. I am a binge eating coach. I started to struggle with my own relationship with food at a really young age, and I struggled for about 10 years, but was able to overcome, first of all, binge eating and then bulimia. And because of the things I learned and the things that I struggled with, that I found there was a missing piece in a lot of the treatment I received that I wanted to be able to provide. And so that's what I do. And I work with people in a group and in one-on-one, but I really also just am passionate about the topic because I think the more people we can get to the point where they're not spending so much time thinking about food and feeling overwhelmed by food, they can think about other things and do so much more in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big and really important part of binge eating recovery. It's not just because there was an Instagram post that you posted recently saying the goal is not to just stop binge eating. Would you want to maybe explore a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know exactly which post it is, but I think a lot of times what I'll talk to my clients about is if you just get to the point where, there's two pieces to it. I think sometimes it can be overwhelming. I need to overcome all of my stuff before I overcome binge eating. And that can be really paralyzing because sometimes people have a lot of stuff and getting through all of that and diving into all of the things can be a lot. So trying to dive into all of that before you overcome binge eating does need to happen. You can figure out what needs to happen for you to get to the point where your relationship with food is better. And then on the other side of that, when you just try to approach the food piece, and when you just try to change your, just trying to stop the binge eating behavior and you cut all the food out and you lock all the food up and you never let yourself be around food. That's also not really going to get you to the point where you mentally have that weight lifted off of your shoulders.
Yeah. And just to go to rewind a bit backwards, because I think this will all go full circle. But like you mentioned at the start that you struggled with binge eating and then it probably progressed to bulimia. From each age. How young is young? How young was young, actually?
Well, it's kind of a blurry line because my relationship with food was really bad from the time that I remember being in kindergarten here in the States, which is about 5 to 6 years old, and thinking things that now I look back and I'm like, that wasn't a healthy way to think about food. That wasn't a healthy way to think about my body. Oh. And then I started going on diet not long after. I remember being around probably 7 years old when I was just thinking okay, I'm not going to gain another pound. And I was 7, you're supposed to be gaining more weight. You're supposed to be growing. And I didn't have a healthy relationship with that. And my parents, with the best intentions, did not understand how detrimental some of the things that they were doing around food were. And I started dieting from the time I was in 3rd grade, 8, 9 years old. And so my relationship with food was pretty bad, but the more disordered eating started when I was about 12.
Yeah, I have so many questions out of just what you said just now. I don't know where to start, but maybe just starting from the life cycle. Um, so that's really interesting because when people think about like eating disorders or disordered eating habits, usually they say it comes up during like teenager times, high school. Um, in the UK, it's probably like GCSE or A level, which is a stage of school. Anyway, so it's really interesting coming from a really, really young age, like 5, kindergarten. What do you think actually prompted, like, what was your goal of using food to control something? Were you trying to control your weight or look a certain way?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of insecurities that I had. I was born with a birthmark on my face, and I had several surgeries from the time I was like 2, and having a scar on my face, there's a lot of insecurities around that. And there's several factors for sure. There's not just one thing, but I think for me it wasn't that I was at this like non-functioning, very disordered level at that age. I just can now see that if I saw somebody doing the things I was doing at that age, you'd be like, "Well, those are red flags. That's not leading down a good path." And that's definitely what I see looking back now. And there was many things that were good about my childhood, and there were things that were missing in the emotional support area. And I have learned and come to understand that a lot of those things just set me up and created this perfect storm for an eating disorder.
Mm.
And part of the benefit of it getting really bad really young was I got help really young and was able to enjoy the benefits of having a good relationship with food for a much, I think like now having the relationship with food that I have and the freedom that that gives me is definitely worth that tumultuous relationship with food starting at such a young age.
Yeah. So just so I have like the timeline, if that's okay, if you're comfortable sharing with it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So what age did you think you started looking back at your life? Did you start noticing, okay, that was pretty disordered when I was this age, and then around what age did it start turning into bulimia?
Yeah. So I think that the realization was gradual. I saw an article at some point when I was somewhere around like 12 or 13 that was talking about binge eating disorder. And I was like, whoa, this is what I'm doing. There's like a name for it. And that blew my mind that there was a name for what I was doing. And that was like the first year for me when things started to turn into more of binge eating. And it wasn't like as giant of binges as I eventually had, but it was like me doing all the sports and not eating enough and then coming home and like pouring one bowl of cereal and then pouring another and not feeling in control at all. And while it wasn't leading me to feel like, no, I wasn't functioning or anything, I did just think about food all the time.
Mm.
And so I started to realize I didn't have a good relationship with food, but I didn't realize that the dieting was such a big piece of that. I was like, oh, I need to eat less. I need to have more control. I didn't realize that me dieting from a young age, me cutting gluten out and not eating any bread and doing things like that when like it wasn't even a thing yet. That was a factor in why I couldn't stop eating. And I just thought like, oh, I just have a bad relationship with food, but I didn't realize why. So I'm like, all right, I'll try harder. And I am somebody that in most areas of my life, I'll set goals and I'll achieve them. Like I am very committed to things. I am very intentional. And this was just one area that I would go hard. I would set big goals and I wasn't able to achieve them because biologically, obviously, that was not working in my favor. I was growing and not giving my body enough food. And so it was screaming and fighting against me. And I thought that that was a problem with me until I was about 16. And at this point, that's when things started to turn into bulimia. And that's when my parents started to take what I was bringing to them as a problem a little bit more seriously. I think because they weren't seeing the binge eating and I was so active that I wasn't gaining a lot of weight, because it wasn't visual, because they couldn't see it, they weren't taking it very seriously. I brought it up and I said, I'm struggling with this, but they didn't really know what to do with that. And they weren't able to, they have their own things and they didn't really take that very seriously. But as soon as I started getting into the bulimia territory and I was purging, and at that point, because there was a visual, because I vomited, that was enough for them to take that seriously. And I started working with a therapist, and luckily they found me a therapist that, and I was lucky enough to have access to that, where I was able to understand that the dieting was a big piece of this. Not that I let it go right away, but I was able to get educated on where some of the problems were. And then it started to piece together as I got more educated on why this cycle happens. And it's not because I just didn't have the willpower I needed.
Yeah, I completely agree because, like, well, this is only recently, like, I'm just, first of all, that must have been a very difficult experience, and just well done for like getting out of it. It's not easy. You're really fighting against your brain, trying to escape these thoughts, especially when you had these thoughts starting from a really, really young age. It was like probably ingrained into your mind. So I'm really glad you're in a much better place now, assuming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
And the thing is I started getting help at 16 and it did take a long time. It was like, it didn't just like, oh, now I intellectually understand what's going on. Like, I read intuitive eating. I read Health at Every Size. I started to understand different concepts, but the understanding wasn't enough. And that's where I know, like, I'm sure people listening to this can relate to that, because I think like most people I talk to, they really struggle with that. It's like, okay, you can intellectually get it and still struggle. And I did for a long time. There had to be the right pieces falling into place and the things in my life to click. And probably also me just growing up and having some space and perspective that allowed me to get to the point where I was able to actually let go of this need to try to restrict and lose weight, because I was feeling uncomfortable with the weight that I would gain from binging and perpetuating the cycle of going up and down and focusing on these numbers and caring so much more about the food and my weight than the things that now I see that are really what I value.
Yeah, like you mentioned back then, like you didn't even realize it was a problem. You thought it was normal to just be focused on food, be focused on calories. And I think a massive thing, which obviously you're doing also, is trying to raise awareness that binge eating, it's not really normal. It's not meant to be normal. And we tend to throw around the word. I don't know if you've heard people being like, oh, I'm just going to binge on Netflix. I binged on this. I binged on Coke Zero or something, when it's not actually the proper definition of the dietary binge.
Yeah. I think an interesting piece of that, and like the normalization of using that term, is something I heard recently. I don't remember where I heard it. But somebody said binge eating is common, but it's not normal. And I thought that was a really good explanation. I think in our culture, and if you don't struggle with food, there's a lot of other things to overdo and struggle with and take to extremes. And I think that is common. And it isn't something that you need to like carry all this shame for. A lot of us do not a lot of us can't look back on our lives and be like, yeah, I'm really set up with the emotional skills I needed to not overindulge or like numb out. But it is something that is not healthy. It's not like to spend so much of our mental space on things, to not feel comfortable being with our emotions, to not even be aware of our emotional state. that's not something that I'd wish upon anybody. So I think there is like this normalization because most people don't have the skills to not numb from their lives in some ways. And I think a lot of people hold shame for the ways that they numb. It's like, okay, it's not food, but it's alcohol, or it's overdoing it on like even just social media and like procrastinating things with that. Whatever it is for you, wherever the things that you struggle with are, there can be so much shame around that. I think that was another piece that I had to realize too, because like, yeah, I got through like, okay, I'm not binge eating, but like I'm working all the time, or I'm not binge eating, but I'm like scrolling mindlessly for hours. And that like binging behavior, while it might not be like the same, and sometimes it's used more comically than binge eating disorder, I think that it's something that is just very common in our world. Is a lot of people don't have the emotional skills to not numb out with all of the things we have access to.
Yeah. And do you feel like raising awareness, talking about binge eating, like having people who are struggling with the relationship with food, just having an outlet to talk about it, to also maybe quote unquote vent about their frustrations, because with binge eating, or binge eating disorder, it's a condition or a set of symptoms where it's heavily revolving around secrecy, embarrassment, shame. Do you feel like people talking about it more often would really massively just let out those emotional steam, quote unquote?
Absolutely. I think that so much of that shame comes from this like, I'm broken. This is just
Mhm.
me that struggles. And that doesn't fully go away when you understand how common it is. But something that I have seen is when I start working with a new client, or when I'm talking to somebody and I just put words to what they're going through, and like even just take it from like, okay, yeah, maybe you understand that there's some binging going on, but like these are the things, and I can like, I know the process of binge eating very well. I heard it all. There's nothing that people bring to me. I'm like, oh, that's a first. Maybe there used to be, but really, like most of it, like I did that. So there's not any judgment there. There's just this understanding of like, yeah, and this is what's happening, and this is the reason why. And I think that that can be so healing. I
Mm.
think, like, if I think back on that 12-year-old version of myself that was just so relieved to know there was an aim for what I was doing, I think that that's a good place to start. And then once you get more familiar and you really understand that you're not alone, you're not as broken as you might feel, and there's a reason that you're binge eating. I often talk about the 3 causes of binge eating. Like, I just kind of bucket it into different things, but restriction is the main thing. But even once you start to let go of that restriction, habit and emotion can still play a role. And usually they're kind of braided in together. And the emotion piece plays with the restriction. But usually I've never found somebody that we can't fit their binging into those categories, like the restriction, habit, and emotion. And sometimes even just having that and understanding that like that's not the cause, not some like deep brokenness within you, but just restriction, habit, or emotion. There's something within those categories that causes that. And when you can talk about it, and when you can start to categorize it like that and take away this, like, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, that can free up so much shame that allows you to then overcome binge eating, find things that work for you, find solutions.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Like, so when you find, I don't know where to start. It's first of all, I just want to say like it's really good like when you're working with your clients that it's kind of like a mirror. Like they're seeing like this person who has been struggling with binge eating, bulimia, the whole package, straight from a young age, and now you're in a much better place. And what was it again? Those three main triggers: restriction, habit, and emotion.
Emotion.
Yeah. So those are essentially like the main triggers of binge eating. But
Mhm.
it'd be really good if you could try to explain a bit more about restriction, habit, and emotion. Like if I
Yeah.
was like, let's say I was a person who was struggling with binge eating coming to you, and
Mhm.
I didn't realize, oh, restriction? I don't think I'm restricting. I'm binge eating every 2 days or something. Would you want to
Yeah.
explore more about restriction?
Yeah. So there is a free resource on my website that talks about this. If you just go to kristacouchcoaching.com, and I can give you that link if you want to share it.
Mhm.
Um, restriction, pretty much everybody that binges at some point, this has been a factor. And that's because when you're not giving your body enough fuel, you're not giving your body enough food, your body's going to think that something's wrong and ask for more food. That's really like the fundamental basic way of explaining that. And this is where intuitive eating, that book can be really helpful for people in really understanding the ways that thinking about food in a diety way for most of their life impacts their ability to listen to their body and honor their hunger and honor their fullness. So that's pretty much always a factor. I think something I always like to explain to people is the Angel Keys study, where a group of men ate 1,500 calories per day and started to show very quickly signs of starvation, like obsessing about recipes, having more mental health struggles. Like when you really look at that study, it's mind blowing the amount of symptoms that there were, severe symptoms for eating 1,500 calories a day. Like that is still widely recommended.
I
Like
know.
tons of people think that that's completely fine to eat 1,500 calories. And yeah, maybe like women, men, there's differences, but still like the amount of calories that many diets recommend is just not enough. And so even if you you think you're doing a relatively good job of letting go of that mentality and not dieting, there still might be things that are making it hard to start eating when you're hungry and stop when you're full just because you have this history with dieting. So that plays a huge role. But then there's also this other piece, and like this is something that encompasses both the habit and emotion piece. Is a lot of people will say, okay, like I'm eating enough throughout the day, I'm listening to my body, but then I get to the evening and I've been busy all day and there's a lot going on, and I start eating a cookie and then I reach for another cookie and then I just can't stop eating. And what's often happening is there's this moment of intense desire. Like the cookie tastes good. Cookies taste good. But when you're eating the cookie and it tastes good, and then you just say, screw it, I'll just eat more and I'll be better tomorrow. I'll make up for it tomorrow. There can be this moment of relief where, like, instead of feeling restless and instead of feeling this intense desire, it's like, oh, like, I'm just able to eat cookies. And even if it's just relief for a moment, even if you're like being completely mean to yourself and beating up on yourself like 30 minutes later, that doesn't matter. You're feeling relief in that moment. And that's even just understanding that can be so freeing for people. It's like, oh, that's what's happening. But I'm thinking that there's just something broken about me because I beat myself up right after this happens, but I still don't understand why it's happening. And so that can be huge.
Yeah. And I think when people think like, oh, I've been eating regular meals, but then I just eat, I get these intense cravings for cookies and everything. I've been trying to be so good as much as possible. And they
Yeah.
try to point it down to themselves as if that they're the lazy ones. They don't have any willpower. If this person on
Mhm.
social media is telling me to eat chicken, broccoli, and rice, and from what it seems, this person says he or she is having chicken, broccoli, rice 7 times a week, no cheat days, no cookies. It could really like mess up with your brain, especially since social
Yeah.
media, everyone follows. You don't really see what their true habits are. especially with people on social media, um, anyone can have eating disorders, disordered eating habits, where they're not people to look up to.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's something that is important for people to recognize is there might be days where like chicken, rice, and veggies sound good, or that like you end up eating less. And then the next day, your body can regulate and say, hey, I need more. And our bodies do a fantastic job of that. But when you add in comparison and when you add in all of these different rules, it's so hard to just listen to that. It's so hard to actually enjoy the variety of meals, enjoy the chocolate cake and the broccoli and chicken. And I think that for me has been the best part about not dieting, not having any of that is just like, yeah, there's some days where I end up eating less. There's some days that I end up eating more, and none of it has to lead to this like emotional overwhelm of I messed up. I need to get back on track. Or like I'm doing so good because I ate the good meal that I see on social media. Like none of that emotional roller coaster has to happen. It's so free.
Mm-hmm. So, like to get rid of restriction, most of the times you'd have to eat more and eat the foods ideally you crave during the moment, not like replace it with a banana or something. Going back
Yeah.
to your personal story, because there must have been a moment where this must have been like, that's the way I'm meant to be getting rid of binge eating. I have to eat what I'm craving. I have to eat regular meals. I have to eat a little more than usual. How did you react the first time you found out you had to eat more?
Well, I think that like I understood it for a while, like kind of. And then I remember it really just hitting me like, I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to like really like I'm still binge eating, I'm still struggling, but like I don't really want to give into this process because it's scary and it brought up a lot of fears. I remember bringing that up with somebody that was helping me, and it was a dietitian actually. And I remember her just saying like, would you rather gain more weight and not be struggling with this or continue to struggle with this for the rest of your life? And like, that was a really hard thing for me to grapple with. Like, it sounds like a straightforward question now. It's like, okay, obvious. Like, I would rather have gained all of the weight and felt healthy and not felt out of control and not had this emotional burden. Like, give me all the weight. Like, I'd rather have that. At the time, there was no trust in that. There was so much fear. I wasn't ready to do that. And I think that for me, like really having that laid out for me, like these are your options. I had to sit with that for a couple of years, not days, not months. Like it took me a while to really get to the point where I was ready to say, yeah, I'd rather gain weight. And then what happened is I didn't really gain weight, but my that was just my story. That was where I was at. But as soon as I really chose that, like, I need to just listen to my body and eat the things that I want to eat and know that, like, my body's regulating itself, like, things just got so much easier. My body just all of a sudden started regulating. And, like, I'd go to the doctor year after year and, like, oh, my weight's same, clothes still fit the same. And, like, I haven't obsessed about my weight. Um, I did just, I gave birth in December. I just had a baby boy and my weight did go up when I was pregnant. I don't know exactly how much. I did not pay attention closely. I've seen like a few things on medical records,
Mm.
but I think the really freeing part of that is that like, I'm like, okay, I gained weight. And like, I've seen other things posted where people are pregnant and they're freaking out about that.
Oh
And for
no.
me, like, there has been adjustments. Like I've had moments where I've had bad body image moments and like I've shown up for myself in those moments, but panicked. I haven't been like, oh no, I'm gaining weight or oh no, I don't have my old body back. It's just been like, okay. And I think it's because I already did the work of accepting that possibility of like my body being bigger. And I still am at a very like socially acceptable weight and don't have to deal with some of the bias that many people do. So I fully understand that. But I think that having the ability to know, like, okay, I could be in a body that even wasn't accepted widely. And if I'm feeling healthy, I'm feeling mentally healthy and physically healthy, I'm totally okay with that. I think that is such a big hurdle that took me a long time to get through. But once I did, man, things got easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge pivotal thing that many people that binge eat have to work through. And it can be something that's not easy to just snap out of. But if you can accept yourself at a higher weight than you are now, you no longer have to worry about putting a few pounds.
Mm. Going a little bit backwards. So you said you gave birth in December?
Yeah.
Like last year, 2022?
Yeah. I have a 3-month-old. Yeah.
I just want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you heard of the set point theory about weight?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, that's the thing. We're trying to raise awareness with people who are struggling with binge eating. Because when people
Mhm.
struggling with binge eating, like you said a while back, is that if you're binge eating, you're deprived. It's a symptom that your body's crying out for more. You're probably at a much lower weight than your comfortable set body weight. But once you get back to start to eat regular meals, and then like you were the set body weight, then you just stay there. Like your hunger hormones just start to re-regulate. So most people
Yeah.
start binge eating. They're at their deprived state.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And some people have gained a lot of weight from binge eating, and I see it all. I see people that have been very restrictive in their binges, like are different, and there's the behaviors and the emotions behind things can be the same, and people can end up at different body sizes. But I think that for me, it had to really click that okay, I understand this intellectually. I understand that my body wants to fight for this weight, whatever, but can I really trust it? And and that was a hard thing for me to understand. But now, looking back, it's my body completely has fought to stabilize. I see it all the time. It's there's one day where I'm so hungry and I'm just especially right now, I am breastfeeding, and there are days where I need to eat a lot of food. Man, my appetite is never ending. But then the next day, my body regulates if I end up eating too much for what I needed that day. It doesn't end up being too much. And that's just because my body's fighting to be at a set point. And when I just let that be, there's no drama. But when I tried to control that for so long, when I try to fight against that, man, it just makes life harder.
Yeah, it's kind of like a beautiful and a magical thing, actually, because it's kind of amazing how our bodies, just know just how much to eat, or maybe if it's not craving for as much, it won't really ramp up those hunger hormones. It's like a dimmer kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what that would be called, but I know what you're talking about, a light dimmer.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
can upregulate or downregulate its hunger hormones based on our body's needs. It's kind of like magical. Just one of
Yeah,
the yeah.
it definitely is. Our bodies are amazing, and we just
Yeah.
aren't taught to. Most of us were not taught that, oh, yeah, your body's completely fighting to keep you the healthiest you can be, and making it really easy to regulate where you need to be at your optimal health. Nobody taught me that until I was older. It really helped, but it really is amazing. And I think that there's a very, very large weight loss industry that is well, we make a lot of money when you don't believe that.
By the way, just a quick break from the podcast to let you know of my free hunger regulation webinar series, which is in the link in the description of this podcast. There's also an ebook version if you're more of a reader than a watcher. This is the perfect resource I wish I had when I struggled with binge eating years ago, which is used to guide you from everything you need to know, from why we binge, what are the binge triggers, and the eating pattern to stop binge eating. Because when we've been struggling with binge eating for so long, you and your body lose touch of what normal hunger and normal fullness is. You're constantly on feast or famine mode. So head to the link in the description of this podcast for the free hunger regulation resources to have a clear game plan to tackle binge eating for good. Anyway, let's get straight back to the episode.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that's because the weight loss industry is fueled by like vulnerability, emotion, and everything. And most of the supplements and the advice meal plans don't really work because it's very unsustainable. But
yeah.
it's crazy. I mean, people are losing sacrificing or trading their food freedom to try to look a certain way at the cost of having 24/7 food thoughts, food anxiety, food guilt, embarrassment, shame. It's definitely not worth it once you've tasted and seen what life is like without thinking about food 24/7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's such a shame and something I think a lot about that really motivates me to want to speak out about binge eating is like, man, can you imagine a world where like nobody's brain was taken up by their calorie counts or the different thing they're trying this week, the complicated meal plan or the elaborate plan to lose weight, if nobody was spending all of their energy doing that, or even just a little bit of their unnecessary energy doing that, and everyone was able to trust their bodies, like we live in a very different world. There would be a lot of mental space freed up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I heard the story from a friend that once she started to escape diet culture, quote unquote, no, actually not even quote unquote, that's a real thing, escape diet culture, then she had much more mental space to just think about things, focus on her goals. She started going to university. Another person started to go traveling because she was like very nervous, or the thing that was holding her back from traveling is, oh, there's no calorie counts on certain street foods, or like, how am I going to enjoy my, she said, my holiday if I'm worried about how I'm going to look for the holiday, the pictures. Some people who are struggling with their relationship with food, they don't even take pictures of their time at the beach, summertime. And I think it's such a sad thing, really, that they're just sacrificing all these precious memories just to chase this goal of trying to kind of look like someone behind the screen who's probably struggling or taking performance enhancing drugs just to maintain that look.
Yeah. It's really sad because it's not something that most people are aware that there's a way out of. And I think binge eating sometimes can put people at the extreme where they're suffering enough where they realize like, oh, this isn't working. But then there's also a lot of people that like will do that for their whole lives. There's people I know that have dieted their whole lives and are probably going to be worried about the calories that they've eaten the day that they die. And I think that that's something that is heartbreaking to me because I think that people deserve better than that. People deserve like, if I really think about how many people genuinely think that like the amount that they weigh, the number on the scale, the way they look in the picture defines their worth, I think there's far too many people that really feel that way. And I've felt that way 100%. And I won't say that there are moments where like I have bad body image moments or moments of insecurity. But what I'm grateful for is that those are moments, not like the whole picture. When it's a moment and you can move on from it, you can move on to being so much happier, feeling so much freer. And I think that it's one of the trickiest pieces and the hardest pieces about healing your relationship with food and escaping diet culture is accepting that like you can have an imperfect relationship with food, an imperfect body, and be so much happier.
Yeah. It's so like sad and difficult because I've in my TikToks, I get some questions of people asking like, "Oh, like what do you think about me?" Because I've been struggling with binge eating for so many months, not years, months. I'm thinking of getting a gastric sleeve, which is like
Oh,
part of your stomach being removed. Major surgery. Your stomach doesn't grow back. You have to, for the rest of your life, have a smaller stomach or a gastric band, which kind of like puts a band over your stomach, so less food comes
mhm.
in, you become fuller. But all of it sounds very extreme, like, and they're not doing it with supervision with doctors. They're going to like they were thinking of going to like private places like in Turkey where it's cheaper.
Oh,
You don't need you don't get
yeah.
support with a psychologist, stuff like that. And it's pretty sad. Like things how far people would go just to think, oh, like it's really getting out of hand. But as simple as it sounds, like you said, it's just tackling the restriction. If you don't tackle the habits, restriction, and emotion first, then you could just jump into something that could be irreversible.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because I think a lot of people really fight for this. Like
Mm,
weight loss is important because we need to be healthy. And then on the same hand, it's those things are not healthy. A lot of the things that, I mean, there's a lot to be said about how much healthier it is to just work with your body, to just listen to
mm,
it, and
yeah, definitely.
how much that helps your physical health. But it really does put people in a vulnerable position. And there's a lot of people that I've worked with that have had that surgery, and
Mm,
it can change the behaviors for a while, and the root issues are still there. And I think that it's a very complex thing. There's so much to it when you feel trapped and you feel so desperate in that struggle, but it's it does not solve the real issue. And
mm,
when I bucketed restriction, habit, and emotion, none of them was like this deep brokenness that you need surgery to fix. That's not one of them.
mm,
And the surgery can help people temporarily regain control, but then you have the rest of your life to fight the same demons, but with a lot of physical implications of continuing to struggle with food. And I think that that's something where this desperation is very difficult to deal with. I mean, you see a way out, it makes sense to take it, but the consequences of that are severe.
mm. And so these, I mean, I'll just we're close to the time of the podcast, if that's okay. But like just to finish, because everyone's chasing weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. But you mentioned a while back about like health at every size. Would you want to
Mhm.
explain a bit more about that? Like how, like,
Yeah.
yeah, a bit more about health at every size.
Yeah, and the movement holds at every size. I know there's been lots of controversy about different aspects of that, but the science behind it, and I think the really important part to understand is that there really can be like people that are in a much bigger body than what people typically see as healthier and be healthy. And there can be people in what like just our bodies that are very like this like, okay, that's a healthy person that are not healthy at all. And when you look at someone on the outside and somebody looks like a normal size and or a big size, you don't know anything about their health. And I think that that's a really important thing to click that like we can't look at somebody and know the status of their health um by just the size of their body. But then also there's a lot of health benefits to or correlations of being healthier at a bigger size versus being underweight. And I think that that was a really mind-blowing thing for me to understand is that it's a lot healthier to be a little bit overweight and have a really good healthy relationship with food as far as overweight on the BMI scale, which has that's its own thing. But it, um the my understanding was that like, oh, as soon as you get on the scale into this overweight territory, you're unhealthy. And that's not true at all. Um, Life expectancy is higher for people that are categorized as overweight and even obese, like in some instances. And so
Yeah.
it's basically that idea that your health has nothing to do with what you look like on the outside. It's all about how you're taking care of your body. And so that's why it's for me such a bigger priority to take care of my body than it is to fit into a weight range.
I mean, everyone's talking about health in every size, but like you said, like it's also like a higher body weight, and with these healthy habits, and also especially like mental health, it really contributes to like improving your life and
Mhm.
longevity. There's a study. I don't know if you've heard about a study by Matson and friends. So what they did is like they checked like maybe more than 10,000 people. So it's a pretty big study. And then they checked people's mortality, like risk of dying from different BMI ranges, normal BMI, overweight, and obese. And what they found
Oh,
is that whatever their BMI ranges are, it didn't matter what BMI range they are, as long as they're including the healthy habits, it said in the study, then you can technically be metabolically healthy than the next guy. So if this person with obesity is including these healthy habits, which is like including more fruit and veg, physical activity, reducing or not smoking, and what's the last one? Reducing or stopping alcohol. So if you're including those healthy habits, an obese person, according to that really big study, would be much healthier and would live much longer than someone at a normal BMI who's not implementing these healthy habits. So it's been shown, like you said, by research that you can be healthy at every size as long as you're improving your healthy habits.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that that's such a free thing for a lot of people. And like, it doesn't take away the body image thing and the socialized views we
yeah,
have around what our bodies should look like or whatever. But like, it takes away this argument that like, oh, I just want to be healthy. That's why I need to lose more
yeah.
weight before I stop binging. Like, oh, no, like real health comes when you start to treat your body in a way where you you're treating it with love, you're treating it with kindness, and it just naturally you're going to feel healthier because you naturally want to do things like sleep enough and drink enough water and eat
Yeah.
whatever like sounds like the most nourishing, and it's so much easier. Life just becomes so much easier when you're after the health instead of like the size that your body is going to fight against.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for all of the information that is like an information bomb, Krista. And just thanks for sharing your personal story about like your struggle with binge eating and bulimia. And it's amazing to where you are now. And like I'm gonna link Krista's links to where people can find you. But would you mind if people are interested in working with you, where can they find you?
Yeah. One place to connect with me is on Instagram. My handle is binge eating coach. Also, my website is Krista with a K, Krista, couch coaching. And couch is my last name, just spelled like the furniture. And so kristacouchcoaching.com and all of my information's there.
Yeah, and you mentioned you do group programs also?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I mean, like group programs probably work best, in my opinion, because they're sharing experiences together and knowing you're not alone, like we mentioned.
Yeah. And sometimes somebody else's words for things can make things click. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, like that makes sense. I've never heard somebody put it that way. But when you hear somebody else put it that way, it's so powerful.
Yeah,
So,
well, that's amazing. Well, I'm going to introduce this new trend with my podcast guests, and you're the first one. So, in the first line of many podcast guests, I'd like you to ask a question for the next guest. So what question would would you want to ask the next guest? Anything, probably something deep or something.
What is the habit in your life that you're the most grateful for?
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Yeah, I'll ask that for the next guest at the end of the podcast.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to listen and find out what they say.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Krista, for coming along to the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Struggling with binge eating? Gain access to my exclusive self-paced binge eating freedom course found in the link in the description of this podcast. My course is everything I wish I knew when I struggled with binge eating, but it's all wrapped up into one easy to understand platform. You'll finally learn how to put an end to binge eating and put an end to food dictating everything you do, controlling your life. Access it now in the link in the description of this podcast.